everyone, welcome to the Be Strong Be You blog. My name is Tanisha Stansel and I have alopecia areata totalis, which is an autoimmune disease which mistakenly attacks the hair follicles. So I have been MIA for a week. I apologize, but I said this week I was going to do a post and get back into my story. Alopecia Areata Awareness Month is officially done, but we're going to continue on with the awareness through the blog and through things that I may share with you or things I may be doing with other alopecians and other supporters. So I'll start by talking about my feature picture, and I hope as I record this, because you guys know it's a one-shot deal for me, that I actually still have the picture, but it's a picture of me when I was a sophomore in high school. And in one of my posts, I was actually talking about me and my mom like makeshifting wigs by just taking the tracks and just gluing them directly on my scalp, and it becoming very painful and infected. And so I actually took a school picture, and believe it or not, I thought I was like so beautiful. I would just endure all the pain of my sores in my head and me scratching and the itching in summer. So that is my feature picture up there. So in the spirit of still talking about high school, when I left you, I was kind of going over something that had happened to me in middle school regarding my past and my history, and it was titled Meddling into My History. And so I'm going to continue into that story, but I'm going to be in high school, and we're going to talk about my family growing. So in previous posts, I talk about how I was the oldest of four, and my family was a foster family, and we used to have kids of all ages in our home, keeping them as they go through traumatic times. Ironically, as I'm going through my own traumatic time in the same household, it was just a very dysfunctional, warped way of living. And so I've also mentioned in a previous post of telling my mother about the abuse that I had endured and how that went over, and I wasn't believed. So we're going into high school, where I start at the moment I told her, and nothing really happened. It was kind of like repression number one. My repression phase happens. I go into high school. I become this very angry person. People in high school are going to tell you or comment that I was still bubbly, I still laughed. That is all true. That is all true. But inside, the moment I hit my doorsteps of my home, it was just a dark cloud. So the relationship with my mom was just there. She was my caregiver, but we did not communicate really at all unless I needed something. My grandmother was still in my life, and it's very important that I'm going to bring up my grandmother this week, because next week I'm really going to tell my story about my grandmother. My grandmother was still in my life, and really the only way I really left the house was with my grandmother. And even as I got into being a sophomore in high school, she was still a very strong staple in my life that I loved and went to for protection, went to for just feeling like I had a relationship with someone in my family. And so that, I can't speak enough words about my grandmother right now, but next week I'm going to talk about my grandmother in particular. The relationship with God was, I grew up in the church. Church became my escape. It continued to always be my escape to do anything. At this point, I was a choir director, sang in the choir, but really, if it had anything to do with church, I would do it because I knew I would be allowed to go. I was still kind of living this very sheltered life. But did I trust people? No. And as I move forward, I'm going to talk about how my relationship with God evolved from being young and thinking like you're watching what everyone's doing and you're hoping and praying that someone sees what you're going through, and and it kind of felt like no one ever came to my rescue. And I didn't know if it was because they didn't want to get involved, or they really just didn't know, or they just want to turn a blind eye and act like it wasn't occurring. So my relationship with God was just kind of there, but I think it was like me feeling like I was in the physical of church. So it is what it is. Like, I'm still going to church, I'm involved, I'm praying, and I just kept moving forward. But I do remember walking into school and feeling like that was my safe place to be, but still feeling angry because I couldn't really tell anybody what was going on the inside, because I was 1000% sure no one was going to believe anything that I was going through. So sophomore year comes and our family grows, and we have more family members. And I'm still the oldest of all of my siblings at this point. And I think it's important for me to note that no matter what children were in our home, I always looked at them as my brothers or my sisters while they were there. So they come into our home, and during my sophomore year, everything was functionally fine. It seems like everything was normal. Outside of the lack of communication, I continued to be a good student, so school wasn't an issue. I wasn't getting in trouble. I just really hated looking at other people's lives and realizing, like, I want that life. I was very envious of people who simply had two parents. They were hugging, they were having a great time, they were building memories. And I was getting older, and I do notice that as I'm getting older and more children are in our home, people start disappearing from my home, meaning my parents. And I'm not going to talk about what it was now that I'm older. I'm going to talk about how I felt then. I was a caregiver to my brothers and sisters. I was a very responsible sibling, and I babysat a lot. Anyone who knows me from my childhood knows every time you talked about Tanisha, she was always watching some kids. I was always watching kids. That continues to follow me into my adulthood, but for better reasons. But I was always watching them, and I was always making sure that they were fed, and I was always just standing in the gap for something that I had no clue what was really going on. And all I knew is that, in particular, my mother started to disappear from our home for periods at a time. And at this time, I really didn't know my family. I was very sheltered from my family, and I only got to go see them a few times a year if something happened to someone, if my grandmother wanted us to come down for something, but it was very, very rare. So you can talk to any of my cousins and they'll tell you that I did not grow up with them. I sometimes for a long time knew who my aunts were, but didn't know who my uncles were. Didn't know my uncles' names, but I could point out my aunts. And my cousins were just there. And to this day, there's cousins that I don't know that are my cousins. They're just familiar to me because I didn't grow up with them. That's going to tie into my story from last week, or the last post. So everything starts to become this jumbled mess. And of course, I'm getting older, so I'm starting to ask questions in my head, and I'm starting to put two and two together, and I'm starting to put puzzle pieces together, and I'm realizing that my mother's not there. My mother started to be gone for longer periods of time. And as I start to realize the responsibility being put upon me to watch these little ones and to then become their protector, the anger just becomes so overwhelming. And for the first time as a sophomore in high school, I contemplated suicide. And no one was home but my brothers and my sisters. And I'm going to say this because this is key to almost every decision I make from this point on. from this moment of this story. And I remember going into the bathroom, and I stood there by the toilet. I knew nothing about what I was going to do to myself, but it's just something about self-harm that is just the darkest place you could go to. And this is the first time that I go to this place. And I remember picking up a bunch of cleaner from the bathroom counter, and I stood there. I heard my brothers and my sisters running around, playing outside the door, and it was just me and them home. And I said, if I drink this, if I drink enough, hopefully I'll die. Because at this point, I'm in a really bad place with my life, with my family, being sheltered. So I started, and it was so crazy. I just started mixing all of the chemicals together. And to my brothers and sisters, they probably just thought I was cleaning the bathroom. And I sat there, and I literally, it's like that devil and that angel talking to you, and you're just trying to figure out the good and the bad. And I literally mixed everything all together. And of course, the smell of that alone, of mixing all the cleaners, began to become so strong that I started to like dry heave from the fact that I am now inhaling this toxic smell. And in that moment, I'm like, I'm going to drink this. I'm going to drink this. I'm going to lay down on this floor, and whoever finds me, because at this point, I'd rather be dead than living in a house where I'm hurt every day than alive. And I go to put it to my lips, and I start to drink it, and immediately I throw up. I throw up in the toilet from the fact of the smell, from the fact that I was already dry heaving, and eventually it touching my lips and me trying to take a drink of it. And it's like in that moment, I thought, I don't want my brothers and my sister to see me. I don't want them to find me. And I want you guys to understand that it is in every moment from this point that I think about suicide and I think about self-harm, the first thing or the thing that I feel God has put in my life to save me is a family member or someone that I love that just happens to be around me, that just happens to call me at the right time. And I laid on the floor after throwing up from tasting this awful concoction. And I got up and I thought, I guess I gotta brush my teeth. So I gotta brush my teeth because now my mouth smells like cleaner and I've thrown up. And I brushed my teeth and I walked out of that bathroom. And I went to my room. And I always think back to that time. And even as I move forward in my story, I always look back and I'm like, sometimes I've thought, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I just go through that? And so I'm telling you this story because I'm in high school. Depression is starting to set in, but it's not something that I know exactly what's going on with me, because back in this time you really didn't, mental health wasn't exposed, and I would say in the African American community, it was kind of like pray about it, pray that God will just get those spirits off of you and move forward. And no one really dealt with the situation. And at this point, I've been abused. At this point, my mind is warped. But guess what? I smiled. I had good grades and people thought I was doing fine. But it really wasn't. Sorry. So I just wanted to start this post with the foundation of where my mind was as I move forward, so you can watch my mental state evolve through high school, into college, and now as an adult. And that I'll tell you now, I'll just go ahead and tell you, I still deal with mental issues as far as trying to stay positive, but I've gotten better as time has evolved. but it's always hard. It's always difficult. And so this, again, why I'm doing this, because I can't hold this stuff anymore, and I don't want to. So I will be back next week talking about my grandmother in high school, and I'll kind of skip a little bit in the story because she's very important. It's very important to find that one person that is your rock. And I will tell you, when you lose your rock, you almost feel like you've lost your own life. So thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much for watching. Please continue to send your emails. Please continue to send messages of encouragement. And last but not least, share with those who go through alopecia, who go through depression or anxiety, who have thought about suicide, because I have been there. And I just told you one instance of my first time. And once that person goes through that, it's a fight. They have to fight every day to not go back down that road. So thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for the support, and I will see you next week. Be strong and be you.